As Jalen Rhodes approached his private jet, the pilot, Captain Turner, blocked his path, refusing to believe a black man could own the aircraft. Moments later, security was called, tension rose, and whispers spread across the runway. But Turner had no idea. Jalen wasn't just a passenger, he was the owner of the jet and the charter company. What began as prejudice was about to unravel into a shocking downfall. If this moment felt intense, prepare yourself, because what comes next is darker, more dangerous, and far more powerful than anything you've seen so far. Subscribe to Black Battles and hit the bell icon so you never miss our latest powerful stories. The morning sun rose over Van Nuys Airport, casting long shadows across the tarmac. A private jet gleamed under the light, its engines humming quietly as the crew prepared for departure. Jalen Rhodes walked toward the aircraft with measured steps, dressed in a tailored suit that reflected his calm confidence. To the staff who knew him, Jalen was not just another passenger. He was the man who owned the jet and the charter company behind it. Yet, not everyone recognized him. At the bottom of the stairs, Captain Turner, the pilot assigned to the flight, stood waiting. Turner's expression was stern, his posture firm, as though guarding entry to the aircraft. When Jalen approached, Turner raised a hand to block his path. "Excuse me, sir," Turner said firmly. "You can't go up there. This jet is reserved for a private client." Jalen paused, his brow furrowing slightly. "I'm aware," he replied in a steady voice. "The client is me." Turner's eyes flickered with disbelief. He shook his head. "With respect, sir, that isn't possible. I've been given strict instructions about who boards this jet, and your name wasn't mentioned." The ground crew shifted uncomfortably nearby. Some knew exactly who Jalen was, but hesitated to speak. Turner's confidence left little room for interruption, and his tone suggested he would not be questioned. Jalen remained calm. "I am the registered owner of this aircraft," he explained. "I don't need permission to step aboard." But Turner did not move. Instead, he reached for his phone. "I'll need to call security to verify that. Please wait right here." The atmosphere grew tense. The hum of the engines and the distant roar of other planes were the only sounds breaking the silence. Jalen inhaled slowly, not out of frustration, but with the patience of someone who had faced doubt many times before. He knew what was coming, yet he refused to let anger dictate his response. Minutes later, 2 airport security officers arrived. Turner quickly stepped forward to explain. "This man is trying to board without authorization. He claims to be the owner, but I don't believe that's the case." The officers turned to Jalen. "Sir, do you have identification?" one asked politely. Without hesitation, Jalen handed over a folder containing his identification and ownership documents. The officers reviewed them carefully. Everything matched: his name, his credentials, his ownership of the jet and the charter company. There was no question. He was exactly who he said he was. The officers exchanged looks before nodding respectfully at Jalen. "Everything is in order, Mr. Rhodes. You're free to board." All eyes shifted to Turner. The disbelief on his face was unmistakable. His confidence drained as he realized the truth. He had just tried to block his own employer from boarding his plane. Jalen adjusted his jacket, his expression steady. "Next time," he said softly, "check the facts before making assumptions." With that, he climbed the steps of his jet, leaving behind silence heavier than any argument could have created. The silence on the runway was deafening. Captain Turner stood stiff, his authority unraveling as the security officers studied Jalen Rhodes' documents again, this time more carefully. Each line confirmed what Jalen had said. He was not only the rightful owner of the jet, but also the CEO of the charter company that had hired Turner. The truth was irrefutable, yet Turner, unwilling to surrender his pride, tried to push back. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered, his tone sharper now. "There must be some mistake. People don't just—" He cut himself off, realizing the weight of his words, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Jalen didn't flinch. He stood tall, his gaze fixed on Turner with quiet strength. There was no need for raised voices or dramatic gestures. His silence itself was more powerful than any outburst. The officers, now visibly uncomfortable, shifted their attention to Jalen with newfound respect. "Mr. Rhodes," one officer said carefully, Everything checks out. We apologize for the inconvenience." The ground crew nodded, some lowering their eyes, ashamed they hadn't spoken up sooner. They knew who Jalen was, but Turner's loud confidence had intimidated them into silence. Turner, however, wasn't finished. His pride had been wounded, and pride, when mixed with bias, could be dangerous. "This is absurd," Turner snapped. "I've flown for decades. I know how things work." "You're telling me this man—" He pointed toward Jalen, his finger trembling slightly. "Owns this company?" Jalen finally broke his silence. His voice was calm, deliberate, each word heavy with meaning. "Yes, Captain Turner, I do, and I hired you. Which means you answer to me." A stunned hush fell over the small crowd gathered on the tarmac. Turner's face reddened, his authority collapsing under the weight of reality. He had been so sure of his assumptions that he hadn't bothered to ask a single question. One of the officers stepped forward, his tone clipped. "Captain, I think you should step aside." Turner's mouth opened as if to argue, but no words came. His pride had carried him this far, but now it betrayed him, leaving him exposed. He lowered his hand slowly, his voice faltering. I didn't know. That's the problem," Jalen replied softly. "You didn't want to know." The truth of that statement hung in the air like a verdict. For a moment, Turner looked as if he might lash out again, but the weight of the silence crushed his resistance. Within the hour, a call was made to company headquarters. Turner was relieved of duty immediately. His reputation, once defined by his years of experience, now lay in ruins because of a single moment of prejudice. But for Jalen, there was no satisfaction in the outcome. As he watched Turner being escorted away, a familiar heaviness settled in his chest. He had won the battle, yes, but the war was far larger. The constant fight against being underestimated, against being seen as less than he truly was. As he boarded his jet at last, Jalen stared out the window, his reflection staring back at him. He wasn't angry, only tired. This wasn't about one man. It was about a world that demanded he prove himself again and again, no matter how high he rose. The confrontation at Van Nuys Airport could have ended quietly, with Turner dismissed and Jalen Rhodes moving on with his life. But fate had other plans. A bystander, one of the ground crew, had filmed the entire exchange. The moment Turner blocked Jalen, the accusations, the disbelief when the truth came out. By the following morning, the video had spread across social media like wildfire. The caption read, "Pilot refuses to let black CEO board his own jet." Within hours, thousands of comments poured in. Some expressed outrage, others disbelief, and many shared their own painful experiences of being doubted, dismissed, or profiled. Hashtags began trending, news outlets picked up the story, and soon Jalen's face was everywhere. He hadn't asked for the attention, but now he was at the center of a national conversation. Sitting in his office, Jalen watched the coverage on his tablet. Commentators dissected every second of the video, debating whether it was a simple misunderstanding or proof of deeper systemic bias. To Jalen, it wasn't a debate at all. It was a reflection of what he and countless others had endured silently for years. His assistant, Maya, entered the room. "The phone won't stop ringing. Reporters want a statement. Some investors, too. Do you want me to prepare something?" Jalen shook his head. "Not yet. Let them talk first. I don't need to shout over the noise." He leaned back in his chair, exhausted but composed. He knew the story wasn't just about him, it was about perception. In a world that often measured worth by appearance, his very existence as a wealthy black man owning a fleet of jets challenged expectations. Turner's disbelief had only made those hidden prejudices visible. Meanwhile, Turner faced his own storm. Once a respected pilot, he now found himself disgraced, suspended indefinitely while under investigation by the company. His face circulated alongside headlines that painted him as the embodiment of arrogance and prejudice. Friends distanced themselves, and his phone calls went unanswered. But for Jalen, there was no triumph in Turner's downfall. In private moments, he felt the weight of it all, the fatigue of constantly proving himself, the exhaustion of carrying other people's doubts on his shoulders. Victory tasted hollow when it came at the cost of reminding the world that dignity was something he had to fight for daily. That evening, Jalen stood by the window of his home, the city lights stretching out beneath him. His reflection stared back, reminding him of the quiet battles fought behind closed doors, unseen by cameras or social media. The video had gone viral, yes, but it told only part of the story. Deep inside, Jalen knew this was just another chapter in a longer struggle. He didn't want pity or applause, he wanted change. And if his story had forced the world to pause, even for a moment, then perhaps that was the beginning of something larger than himself. The video from the runway had spread across the country, but Jalen Rhodes kept his composure as the storm grew louder. News anchors debated the incident. Social media poured out support and outrage, and opinion columns used his name as a symbol for quiet strength. Yet behind the headlines, Jalen carried something heavier than public attention. Memories of the battles he had fought long before Captain Turner ever stood in his way. Late one evening, Jalen sat alone in his study. The city lights glittered outside his window, but his focus was turned inward. He thought about the road that had brought him here, a journey marked not only by success, but also by repeated tests of his patience and dignity. Years earlier, before he became the owner of a charter company, Jalen had built his career in finance. He remembered walking into boardrooms where every eye shifted toward him, not in recognition of his skill, but in disbelief that someone like him belonged there. Deals he brokered were questioned more harshly, his expertise doubted until proven beyond all doubt. More than once, he had watched opportunities slip away, because people chose to trust a familiar face over his. The breaking point came during a business trip when he tried to book a private flight through a well-known charter service. Despite paying in full, he was met with delays, unnecessary checks, and subtle condescension. The pilot that day had even asked, half-jokingly, "Are you sure you're in the right place?" That experience, layered on top of countless smaller insults, had planted a seed. If the world insisted on doubting him, he would remove all doubt by taking control himself. It was then that Jalen made the bold decision to purchase the very company that once made him feel like an outsider. He rebuilt it, refined it, and made it one of the most respected names in private aviation. Owning jets wasn't just about luxury. It was about reclaiming dignity and creating a space where he, and others like him, would no longer have to justify their presence. Now, as he sat in his quiet home, Jalen realized how the Turner incident fit into that larger story. It wasn't a random misunderstanding. It was another reminder of why he had worked so hard in the first place. He had built his empire not for applause, but for freedom, the freedom to stand tall in spaces that once doubted him. His phone buzzed with another notification, another news outlet requesting an interview, another hashtag trending in his name. He sighed, setting the phone aside. This attention would pass, just as it always did, but the underlying struggle remained. Maya, his assistant, called to check in. "Do you want to respond to the press yet?" she asked. "Not yet," Jalen replied softly. "The world is watching. Sometimes the most powerful response is silence." He leaned back in his chair, the weight of his past still pressing on him, but his resolve unshaken. The storm had only revealed what he had known all along. Quiet resilience was stronger than doubt, and his story was far from over. Days turned into weeks, yet the story of Jalen Rhodes and the pilot who blocked him refused to fade. The video continued to circulate, sparking debate on talk shows, in classrooms, and across dinner tables. For many, it was a story of bias exposed. But for Jalen, it was also a test, one that revealed something deeper about trust, leadership, and the hidden forces working against him. As his company grew in public visibility, Jalen noticed unusual patterns. Anonymous emails began arriving, questioning his leadership. Rumors circulated in industry circles that his company was unstable or mismanaged. At first, he dismissed them as noise stirred by the viral incident. But when a potential investor pulled out at the last minute, citing concerns, Jalen knew there was more to the story. He began investigating quietly. Jalen had always been a man of patience, preferring strategy over confrontation. He asked his assistant Maya to trace the origins of tumors. After a week of digging, she returned with a revelation. Some of the leaks were tied to former employees, people who had recently resigned after Turner's dismissal. But the deeper surprise came when she uncovered a trail leading back to Turner himself. Although relieved of duty, Turner had not disappeared. He had been meeting with a small group of insiders, spreading doubts about Jalen's ability to lead, trying to poison the company's reputation from the shadows. Jalen knew that confronting Turner directly would only escalate matters. Instead, he decided on a different approach. He would set a trap. At the next board meeting, Jalen presented a fabricated piece of information, a false detail about a supposed new investor deal that only a handful of trusted people were told about. It wasn't real, but it was convincing enough to sound legitimate. Then he waited. Within days, that same secret was leaked to an industry blogger, almost word for word. The trap had worked. Someone in his circle was feeding information to Turner. Maya handed Jalen a printed copy of the leak. "We have him," she said. Jalen nodded, his face calm but his eyes sharp. "Now, we don't just know what he's doing, we know who's helping him." That evening, Jalen quietly arranged for a private investigator to gather more evidence. Within a week, the findings confirmed his suspicions. Turner had been orchestrating a campaign to discredit Jalen, supported by 2 disgruntled former employees. Their plan was simple: weaken the company's image, scare off investors, and create doubt strong enough to pressure Jalen into stepping aside. But they had underestimated him. Jalen didn't confront them immediately. He let them believe their plan was working, knowing patience was his greatest weapon. Every move they made, every leak they spread, only added to the evidence being collected. As he sat in his office late at night, reviewing the growing case file, Jal realized this was no longer about one pilot's prejudice. This was about power, control, and the quiet strength required to dismantle an agenda built on lies. The trap had been set, and soon the truth would break wide open. The boardroom was full. Executives, investors, and senior staff had gathered for what was supposed to be a routine quarterly meeting. But Jalen Rhodes knew it would be anything but routine. For weeks, he had been quietly building a case, collecting evidence of Turner's campaign against him. Tonight, it was time to bring the truth into the light. As Jalen entered the room, conversations hushed. Some greeted him warmly, while others exchanged uncertain glances. The rumors Turner spread had done their damage. Doubt lingered in the air like smoke. Jalen could feel it, but he didn't let it shake his composure. The meeting began with financial reports and operational updates. Jalen listened patiently, waiting for the right moment. Then one board member cleared his throat and spoke. "Mr. Rhodes, there have been concerns raised about your leadership. Investors are nervous. We've heard troubling things about mismanagement and instability within the company." It was exactly the opening Jalen had been waiting for. He leaned forward, his voice steady. "Yes, I've heard those rumors too. But the question we must ask is, where are they coming from?" A ripple of unease spread across the table. Jalen reached into his briefcase and placed a folder in front of him. He opened it slowly, revealing printed emails, transcripts, and photographs. "These documents," he said, "show a deliberate campaign to damage this company's reputation. False information has been leaked to the press and to investors. But what's most important is who is behind it." He slid the first page across the table. It showed a transcript of the fake investor deal he had planted weeks earlier, leaked almost word for word to an industry blogger. Gasps filled the room as the board realized someone from within had betrayed their trust. Jalen continued. This leak, and several others, were traced back to individuals working directly with Captain Turner. He tapped another page, this one showing records of Turner meeting with the former employees. Despite being relieved of duty, Turner has not stopped interfering. "He has been spreading lies to undermine my leadership and destabilize the company." The silence was heavy, broken only by the sound of papers being shuffled. Jalen's gaze swept the room. This company was built on trust. We cannot allow personal bias or hidden agendas to dictate our future. The evidence is here. The truth is undeniable. At that moment, the door opened. Security escorted in Turner and the two former employees who had been brought in under the pretense of a separate meeting. The shock on their faces was clear when they saw the evidence laid out before the board. Turner tried to protest, his voice sharp and defensive. "This is all a setup. He's twisting the facts." But the board members were no longer convinced. The evidence spoke louder than Turner's words. Investors who had once doubted Jalen now looked at him with respect. The chairman of the board leaned forward. "Captain Turner, your actions have been exposed. Effective immediately, you and your associates are barred from any further contact with this company. Legal action will follow." Turner's face hardened, but he had no fight left. Security escorted him out, leaving behind a room heavy with both relief and shame. Jalen remained calm, his voice measured. "This was never just about me. It was about the integrity of this company and the values we stand for. Doubt can spread quickly, but so can truth. Tonight the truth has spoken." The boardroom fell silent again, but this time the silence was not filled with suspicion. It was filled with respect. The days after Turner's exposure were a blur of media attention, boardroom congratulations, and messages from strangers who felt inspired by Jalen Rhodes's strength. News outlets covered the dramatic meeting, praising Jalen's composure and the evidence he had presented. His name was trending, not just as a successful businessman, but as a symbol of resilience in the face of doubt and bias. Yet despite the storm of attention, Jalen's heart was not in celebration. Late one evening, he sat alone in his office, looking out at the runway where this journey had begun, the same runway where he had first been denied entry onto his own jet. He thought about how quickly assumptions could shape lives, how easily perception could cloud truth. His phone buzzed. Dozens of congratulatory messages poured in from industry leaders and friends. Some invited him to speak at conferences, and others wanted him to join panels on leadership and equality. For a man who had spent years building his legacy quietly, the spotlight felt strange, almost unwelcome. Jalen wasn't bitter. He didn't want revenge against Turner or the others who had doubted him. Instead, he felt tired of always needing to prove himself. Tired of carrying the invisible weight of expectations that came with who he was and how he looked. That night, he wrote in his journal, "Dignity is not about defeating others. It's about never letting them strip you of who you are." The next morning, Jalen gathered his senior staff. They expected a speech filled with victory, but instead he gave them something different. "We've been tested," he said quietly, his tone steady, not just as a company but as individuals. "We learned that prejudice, fear, and falsehood can creep in anywhere, even here. But we also learned that truth, patience, and resolve are stronger." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each team member. "This company will not be remembered for one man's bitterness. It will be remembered for its ability to rise above it. That's the culture we will carry forward." His words left the room in thoughtful silence. Some staff members had tears in their eyes. Others nodded with determination. Outside the office walls, the public continued to discuss Jalen's story. Some admired his wealth and power, but most admired his restraint, the way he had chosen calm over chaos, truth over theatrics. His quiet dignity became the defining lesson of the story. In the weeks that followed, Jalen returned to what he loved most, flying. Each time he stepped onto his jet, he felt the quiet satisfaction of ownership, not as a boast, but as a reminder of how far he had come. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky with gold and crimson, Jalen boarded his jet once more. He wasn't thinking about Turner, the board, or the headlines. He was thinking about his next journey, about the legacy he was building, not of wealth, but of resilience. And as the plane lifted off the runway, Jalen Rhodes felt the kind of freedom no rumor, no prejudice, and no adversary could ever take away.